Okay, so some of our other work at Lincoln has been looking at water use efficiency, which is very important in dryland pastures. Now we've just got Dr. Mills on the left here, who did her PhD in Coxford in water and nitrogen effects, and we've got Dick Lucas on the right, who's been talking to us on all the other videos about dryland pastures. Now we're just going to go over a few of the principles and the things that are important to maximise your yield in a dryland situation. So I'll pass over to Dick now and Anna.
Okay, Anna, what's the season of the year when really we can expect fastest pasture growth?
Okay, so particularly in the dryland systems that we find in New Zealand, particularly down the east coast, our main production period is actually spring. It's when the temperatures are increasing out of winter and we've had enough soil water recharge during the winter period to actually ensure that there's non-limiting water for growth. This actually allows active growth to take place. We're looking at our annual clovers to fill in that high quality feed gap, and the grasses sort of supplement that by benefiting from the nitrogen fixation from that clover species.
And so when we get to the dry summer, what's going on here? There's going to be a shortage of water, and so what can we do about it? It's something we've got to live with, is it?
Yeah, effectively that is exactly the point. In a dryland system, whether it's on the flat or on a hill where you can't irrigate, once you run out of water, ultimately it doesn't matter what species you're actually growing. It can't produce if it doesn't have water. So the key is to actually minimise your risk by trying to get the most of your farming operation into that small spring window where you can actually make profit and reduce the costs of having to carry stock that you don't want over the summer period.
So having reduced the animals that we can sell, you've still got to be able to feed the ewes, the capital stock for producing, in this case, lambs in the future. So we've got the much lower quality pasture here now, and in this dryland system, perhaps one of its vulnerabilities is the time of the autumn break. Whether or not if it rains, say, in late February, compared with not raining till getting a decent rainfalls until mid to late April is often the case. So what's happening there? We get a bit of rain, a little bit here and there through the summer, but is it any use? And then do we have to have a big lot in autumn?
Okay, so particularly in summer with potential evapotranspiration, what we're looking at is rainfalls of less than 5 millimetres are probably evaporated straight out of the soil, particularly if your pasture's in a state where it's not actively growing. What you're looking for in autumn though is a high rainfall event of about 25 millimetres, and you want those rainfall events to happen sequentially further on to make sure that your germinating annual clovers will actually continue to grow rather than to germinate, as Dick has described previously, in a false rate where it has a little bit of water, germinates and then runs out of water and dies. The extent to which that happens, how much growth you'll get before winter, does depend on the timing of that first autumn break.
Yeah, now this last year, during 2014, we had a huge amount of rain in, I think it was April, May, or even starting in March, enormous amount of rain. Our annual rainfall is normally only about 620 millimetres, but this year it's going to be up in the high, it's going to be over 750, I think, at the rate we're running. But in fact, we've had only half normal monthly rainfall through from August on. November I think was a wee bit nearer average, but it has been a very dry spring, so we're not looking too good here. But okay, people are going to look at the record in future and say 2014 was a good year, but those of us that are monitoring the dryland pastures, it was probably a bad year.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Okay, so the month that you're actually talking about was April. Our monthly rainfall is sort of 50 to 60 millimetres a year. That's our long-term average. In April, what happened is we got 160 millimetres of water. And if you've watched our earlier videos, you would have seen Dick Lucas show a soil profile out here, which is very stony. It's not so much the rainfall It's when it happens, and it's how much the soil can actually store. So of that 160 millimetres, the majority of it would have actually drained to groundwater, and it would have got beyond the root zone of the plants that were actually growing. It would have given no benefit to growth if it goes down past where the roots can reach. And this is particularly important if you see a year where we've had 800 millimetres of rainfall. If it's one of those big months in winter with 200 millimetres of rainfall, ultimately in terms of its active growth once we hit spring, it has very little contribution to our growth.
So arguably the biggest thing with dryland farming is maximising your efficiency of the use of water in spring and summer. And we've had some very interesting results from Dr. Alistair Black at Lincoln too, looking at some of these water use efficiencies and how they relate, how some of the interactions, or not the interactions in fact, that go on with nitrogen. So do you just want to highlight how that sort of works, Anna?
Sure. Okay, so what basically we've found, certainly I found with cocksfoot, is if you had irrigation, a lot of it comes down to fertility. So you can have water applied to 2 cocksfoot pastures, and you give one nitrogen so that it can grow without any nitrogen limitation, and you give the other one nothing. They'll both use the same amount of water to actually grow. The thing is, the one with the nitrogen will produce 22 tonnes of dry matter over the course of a year, and the one without nitrogen will only grow 10 tonnes. And that comes down to the mechanism of photosynthesis. So the nitrogen deficient pastures are less efficient at actually sucking that water up and using it in the production of dry matter, producing leaves that have high chlorophyll content and are capable of photosynthesizing with high efficiency than the nitrogen deficient pastures. And it's a similar story with the pastures that are working under dryland. The only difference is the shape of the production. So you'll basically find over the summer period it flat lines with no production, but the production pre and post water stress behaves exactly the same as if you've got irrigation.
Yes. So we have to maximise our legume content so we can get as much nitrogen into the pasture as we can, because ultimately the more nitrogen we have in that sort of spring-summer period, the more efficiently we can use the water. But as a whole, a non-deficient versus a deficient pasture in terms of grass will use the same amount of water, so it's in our best interest to maximise the efficiency that they use that water and get the most dry matter bang for our buck.
Yeah, and bagged nitrogen is not often an option in our dryland systems either. It's not profitable to spend that money. You may use it as a booster in early spring at a really low rate just to trigger things into action, but financially, particularly when oil prices increase, the price of urea increases, and financially it's just not a viable option. The inclusion of clover transfers nitrogen to your grass, and it's actually a highly preferred species by the grazing stock. Particularly sheep actually prefer a diet which is 70% legume and 30% grass. So there's multiple benefits to it.
So what's the water use efficiency of clover? If you had pure clover?
Pure clover. Well, I can certainly tell you that if you've got pure lucerne, for every millimetre of water you use, which is equivalent to say 1 litre of water per square metre, you'd produce 30 kilograms with lucerne, 30 kilograms of dry matter per millimetre of water used. You're looking at a nitrogen deficient grass without any clover going in it, you're probably looking at that one only producing 7 kilograms of dry matter per millimetre of water used. In a good quality grass clover mixture, where you've got adequate sort of 30-40% clover, in spring you'd be expecting that one to maybe do about 20 kilograms of dry matter per millimetre of water used. So when it comes to your limited water resource in a dryland system, it's really important to understand how efficiently that resource is getting used with the system that you've actually got in place at the current point in time.
So a dryland pasture with no legume is going to be nitrogen deficient, and it's going to waste the rain that comes from the sky, and so Huey will be very upset.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Dick and Dr. Mills, and we'll get back to you next time from Ashdene with some more updates on these experiments in the future. Thank you.